Welcome to Life After Philosophy, where I interview former students about philosophy's effect on their lives. I'm Christopher Anadale. Welcome to Life After Philosophy. My guest today is Eamonn Clark. He is an entrepreneur and doctoral student in moral theology at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Angelicum, in Rome, where he also completed his STB and STL degrees. Eamonn graduated with a BA in philosophy from Mount St. Mary's University in 2014, spent 2 years as a seminarian, and then went to Rome on his own, where he now lives as a student, finishing his doctorate. He's expecting to finish this year. Eamonn, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Professor. Great to be here.
First question. What's it like living as an American in Rome for years and years and as an independent student?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing is, they say DC is a swamp, that you kind of go inside of the Beltway and then there's a tendency maybe not to leave. You become a swamp monster. Rome is a bit of a swamp for laity, who kind of they start pursuing degrees and they're doing this and that. And I had a plan to come to Rome for 2 years, and that was 9 years ago. So it sort of pulls you in. They never quite drained the swamp around the Baths of Caracalla, which is where I live, just up above them. So it really has a way of pulling you in. It's about 30,000 or so American expats in Rome. It's quite a big community. Not all of them are pontifical students, but some of them are. So it's been a really wild experience, very, very unique blessing, and just learned so much that you could never read in a book and like understand how things are.
Is Rome a big international city then?
It's a very international city. I go to my roof, I can almost hit a major UN building with a rock. So it's the FAO, their agriculture building, that's around the corner. And obviously all the embassies are here and the Vatican is here. So everyone's in town for something. There's just reporters everywhere from every country, bishops in and out, clergy, students. It's super, super international city because of the presence of the Holy Father and it's a major tourism destination, of course, and all of these things kind of go together and, make a really interesting mix. Chaotic, but interesting.
Yeah, I can understand that. Of course, we just had the Conclave. That's the kind of thing that happens only a few times in a single lifetime. What was that like as a sort of long-term resident? I imagine you saw, with the old Pope's death and then with the interregnum and then the beginning of the Conclave, there's a sort of event, a big international media event that happens. But what did it look like from on the ground in Rome?
At lunch, everyone had some kind of inside information. Everyone was talking about how we're going to push, our preferred person. A couple of friends had a cardinal staying at their seminary or their house or whatever, and we're talking like, okay, are you going to see them? What are you going to say? How are we going to try to influence things? So that was a really unique, fun game to play, I guess. I did hear Prevost's name in the week before. And kind of heard about what was going on with that. So I like to feel like I was in the know, so it was definitely exciting, very, very electric. I remember I was praying in the Church of San Saba, and then I happened to look at my phone. And not that happens frequently when I'm praying. It does, but and I saw the text, like white smoke went out the door. I said, okay, I'm gonna run. I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna be there for it. And it was just very, very bizarre to see in the space of about 2 to 3 minutes, the entire city like froze and then oriented itself around motion towards a particular place. I got on a bus just in time. I went a few stops, got off, ran through traffic, all of this kind of stuff. So it was different. It was different.
It sounds almost like DC with, of course, maybe with an abbreviated 2-week primary schedule where, the decision's going to be made, but everybody's, like I said, everybody's dishing inside info. Everybody's got their own preferred candidate, and there's a lot of jockeying, and I'm sure certain plenty of lying as well that goes on.
Yes. Yeah, it was a fun game. It's not one that I would want to play all the time. After a couple of days, it started to get old. But it was a fun week. It was a fun week.
Now, tell me about your doctoral studies. You've completed two degrees in Rome, in addition to your degree in America, and now you're on the verge of finishing a degree in moral theology. A, what's that like? And B, where does that lead you next?
So, for those who aren't familiar, the ecclesiastical or church degree system is in theology. It goes through an STB, which is a bachelor's. So I'm actually one of the few people who has two bachelor's degrees. The BA in philosophy, and then came to Rome, got another bachelor's, the ecclesiastical bachelor's in theology, STB. And that's just kind of a general degree. It's sort of like one step above the catechism. And then the ecclesiastical version of a master's is the STL, a license or licentiate. And at least at the Angelicum and in Rome, it seems it's typical, or it is typical at the Angelicum, at least I can speak very clearly. You have to pick a specialization, and so I was always drawn to morals. Had a really good education in morals at the Mount. Of course, there was a whole legacy of Grisey and everyone reacting to Grisey in Emmitsburg, and that had been intriguing for other reasons, including in the STB work that I did. Wrote a pretty, I think, insightful response to some of his stuff. But then I chose to do morals, and I wrote on socialism versus the virtue of charity and how they're different. So that was an extended study that I did. I wrote my thesis on that. And then I was speaking with Dr. Russ Hittinger at one point about social teaching and what I could do that would be worthwhile for a doctoral project. And he said you gotta look at Pius XI and Quadragesimo Anno in this phrase social justice, because that's where that phrase really sort of appears on the global stage in a way that normal people really became aware of it. So it's a Catholic phrase. It's Pius XI's phrase that he borrows from a long lineage of other thinkers. And so I'm really looking at that moment and sort of what Pius XI has going on in that encyclical and sort of what it means, a little bit of what happened after, kind of the breakdown to where we now have, various marches in Seattle that are for social justice or whatever, and it has nothing really to do with Pius XI's vision for a flourishing state. So,
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Now, I think the STL, if I understand correctly, is a teaching degree. You can teach based on it as a
it is.
credential, but of course the doctorate would go still further than that. Do you envision teaching in a sort of conventional way as part of your future?
In Rome, it's there. It's an option. It's quite it's quite a difficult gig to pull off full time as a layman, or even as a secular priest, as a diocesan priest. The pay is very low, and I mean really low. Under $1,000 even for a semester to teach a whole course, 3 credit course.
Good Lord.
So it's the kind of thing where if you're not in and you've not been really pushing and jockeying the right way, it's really, really hard. Maybe as a side gig, at some point it could make sense, but I don't really see that as a viable career path, at least at this time. You got to be teaching in 3 or 4 different places to make it work. And it's just really, really challenging otherwise to get in and have, 5 or 6 courses a semester. And even then it's pretty minimal pay. So there's no teachers union in Rome. There's nothing like that. It's an institutional world built for members of the institutions which implement the teaching. So the Dominicans prefer to hire Dominicans, hire, quote unquote. The Jesuits, it's really built for Jesuits to teach. They can just take their own individuals, their own men, their own members, whatever, and they can just assign them and they pay them, sort of nominal wages, and that goes to their own institutions back home or whatever, and it's done. to go outside of that world. They do it, but you'll never really get tenure. There's a different tenure system in Rome than there is in the U.S., but you'll never really be able to climb the ladder and get an ordinary professorship as a layman in Rome. Almost impossible. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you then about a more general topic about clericalism, which is a term that comes up in a number of different contexts and is attacked from a number of different angles by different people in the church and outside of the church. As a layman living in Rome, what's your perspective on clericalism in the church? Is it a problem? And if it is it a big problem? Does it need to be addressed perhaps by Pope Leo?
Yeah. So, yeah, clericalism is one of those buzzwords, right? It kind of can mean anything and everything to the point where it sort of means nothing. In my experience, the worst kind of clericalism is when a priest or a bishop does something wrong that hurts someone, and they think they don't need to apologize. And that's around. That's just human nature. It's just particularly more deformed when it happens among clerics who are supposed to be, scions of humility and forgiveness and mercy, and so that does exist, and the kind of entitlements. This is around, but I really don't get the sense that that's as serious of a problem among normal priests, especially the ones that I live with and I'm around all the time in Rome. It's there, especially from certain countries, but that's more of a cultural thing, less of a clerical thing. They would act entitled anyway. It comes off as worse because they're priests.
Yeah, good to know. Thanks. I know I asked about the conclave a moment ago, but right now, as we're talking about this in late May 2025, everybody's talking about their hopes for the new papacy of Pope Leo XIV. I don't know if I can really ask about the vibe on the ground in Rome or your feeling about that. Everybody is sort of hoping, I hope the Pope will implement this agenda, this agenda. I'm looking for signs in what he's written or said or what's been said about him in the past. What are your expectations or hopes, ambitions for the new papacy? And people are thinking this is an opportunity that we might see some really good things coming out. What's your feeling about that?
There are a few friends that I have, including one priest who's is a career Vatican guy. He served under John Paul II, knew him all the way through Benedict, through Francis. Was kind of in their not their inner circle, but sort of their mid-level circle. And he's someone who seems to know him, and if he likes him, then that's good. That's sort of my take. He seems to have a very positive impression. Then I have a former boss who had Thanksgiving with Bishop Bob, a year ago or whatever, and he had an hour and a half long conversation with him, and he was very happy. And my old boss is very, I wouldn't say arch conservative or anything, but he's solid, and he was thrilled about it. So I hadn't known too much about Leo before his election. I knew that he was there. I knew kind of just from Chicago, was sort of a little bit of a dark horse in some ways. But I'm cautiously optimistic, as I think are most people around me. Um, Certainly not a scholar, he's not he's not Benedict, but he seems to be someone who really is a safe player and wants to listen to people and really do the right thing in a cautious and measured way. Everyone seems to get that sense, so that's very hopeful. Um, yeah, that's what I can say.
Yeah, that fits with what I hear and just my expectations. I mean, it's in a sense we got spoiled in the 80s and 90s and beyond by having two scholar popes in a row, which is atypical. You don't normally get people with that sort of background and that sort of skill set. But after that, a lot of depends on the personality, the character, the management style of the new pope. And since he's new, the only way to find out is to listen to people who have some connection or some prior relation with him. And from all I hear, he's a good man and loves the church. And until he does some
Yes.
things, we'll just have to wait. I just have to wait and hear.
Yes, and let's let him move into his apartment first, and stop speculating about like if the color of his socks is this, then that means that he has this opinion on the liturgy. Like it's a little bit much sometimes. It's fun, but one has to be moderate in these things as well.
Maybe a little bit of leftover enthusiastic speculation from the time before the conclave and during.
Yes, yes, and everyone's an expert now on papal dress and what it means. Yeah, it's like I remember when Benedict wore the Camorro, which is like this kind of fuzzy Santa hat looking thing, and like the last one who wore that was, I don't know, Clement the 11th or something. And all the blogs, oh my gosh, it means. And he was asked, he said, well, no, it was cold out and it looked really warm and cozy, so I wore it. It's like
Yeah,
sometimes it's really that simple.
right. Now, I've followed some of your work online, and I know you've been saying some things about the history of the papacy and some of your investigations there. Is that a sort of a side interest of yours in
It's a
popes from the
big
past?
academic side interest, the history of the popes. You just learn so much about world history, about church history, about the faith, and just yeah, kind of develop a sense for how close we are to the incarnation. Like it's really not that long ago. And there is this line of men who connect us to it in this very unique way. And the stories, some of them are just bonkers. I mean, they really are. So
Well,
it's fun.
the one that always gets shared, of course, is about the Pope who had his predecessor's corpse dug up and thrown into the river or something like that. There was
Yes.
some really wild stuff going on
Yes.
in the
Pope
11th and 12th
Handsome.
centuries. Yeah,
Pope Handsome. Yes. Who was a laicized bishop who had abandoned his diocese of Palestrina, robbed a bunch of women's cloisters in Rome, ran away to France, maybe tried to become Archbishop of all Bulgaria illegally. The Pope said, "You're done." And then he shows up in Rome again, and they say, "You know what? We need this guy." And then his successor's successor, I think, Stephen VI, did not like him. And so he put him on trial posthumously. Very grotesque, very bizarre in the Lateran complex. And yeah, that's the sort of thing that went on, 1,000 years ago. So yeah, yeah,
no, it's like imagining the more colorful history of say early 19th century America. The people beating each other with sticks on the floor of the House of Representatives, and just imagine that extended back 10 or 20 centuries, and you've got
yeah,
a
yeah,
huge
yeah. I
store of
was just I
stories.
was just writing about Paul V's conclave, the Borghese, whose name is on the front of St. Peter's. It's the only conclave per se where there was a brawl among the cardinals, and there was a cardinal had some bones broken because Caesar Baronius, the great historian, was really opposed to the election of this particular cardinal who was apparently infamous for using very colorful language, and he did not like this. So it was shouting, and a brawl ensued. It could be heard outside the chapel, out in the streets, apparently, and then we got the Borghese Pope Paul V. So fun times.
Yeah, well, it makes you thankful for a peaceful transition of power compared to sometimes in the
Absolutely,
past. Yeah.
absolutely.
Something else I've seen online that you've been talking about is some of your work doing fundraising for different projects around the world, running or walking between cities. Can you tell me a little bit about some of those that you have done in the past and maybe coming up?
Sure. So it's the origin. I mean, I won't tell you the whole story. It's a little too long, but I was living and still I'm living with all these priests from all these different countries. A lot of third world guys come to Rome for studies, higher studies. Um, and, I just thought like, gosh, I don't really know much about this, but I know that, these guys back where they're from, they're kind of destitute. And how can I think of a way to sort of get involved with that? And some things kind of fell into place. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this athletic fundraiser. I wanted to get back into running. I was a track athlete at the Mount. And I said, yeah, I've wanted to run from Rome to Assisi for a while. Why don't I do that? This is 100 miles. Um, so I kind of put the project together. I ended up talking to a priest friend from Malawi who's just been named his diocese as vicar general. So he's heading home. He's going to be Vicar General of the Diocese of Mzuzu. And we found this clinic. He told me about this clinic, with some sisters from this Indian congregation, the Clarist congregation, and they run this clinic in this little town called Rumfi. And their main work is sort of, neonatal stuff. They help with delivery of children. They help the mother of child essentially survive that. It's one of the main things they do, but it's a general, care facility or whatever. And their medicine cabinet was essentially empty. And so I said, okay, we're going to stock the medicine cabinet. So I did the run, promoted it, set it up to where it was sort of an interactive thing. So you could track me while I ran 100 miles from Rome to Assisi, live updates, the whole thing. People got really excited, and they were donating. There was little prizes. I would give shout outs, for those who'd given $250 or more. So it was really amazing. And there's a documentary on my YouTube channel about that. So, and there's more events coming, I'll just say that.
That's very good. Is YouTube a good place for people to follow you, to learn more about that if they'd like to see what's going on?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Great. I was going to ask you about some more of your projects, but it just occurred to me that one of the things we haven't talked about yet is philosophy, and that was really the sort of the reason I called. Uh, can you tell me something about, 10 years farther on, what does an education in philosophy look like? Has it been a resource for you? Has it shaped the what you've done subsequently? In what ways has it affected the life that you live now?
So some of the criticism that I've gotten uh, about my doctorate, from a priest who's pretty well known. I won't say his name, but I said, you're not writing a philosophy doctorate. That's sort of how he talks. If you know who he is, then great. So you're not writing a philosophy doctorate. And I would say most of my doctoral work is actually philosophical. It's only the last chapter, which I'm about to kind of finish up, that's really theological. It's essentially Catholic social teaching, as we know. It starts with Father Luigi Teparelli d'Azeglio. Okay, he was the rector of the Roman College after the Jesuits were brought back to life. Okay, and the Pecci brothers were his seminarians. So Leo XIII was his seminarian, and so he sort of reintroduces the study of St. Thomas to mainstream seminaries, and also starts this profound reflection on the state and how a society flourishes. And so it's really been a philosophy doctorate that I've been writing, mostly philosophy and history, with a little theology sprinkled on top. So that's something that's very alive to me, and I'm able to pull on this education I had at the Mount. All of the I would say the best thing, and everyone seems to say this, is the historical classes. The ancient, medieval, modern, contemporary. And that's a very, very, as I understand it, kind of unique approach that you don't get that in most university settings. So that positioned me well, and it's always kind of been animating my thoughts, and also just undergirds everything that I do in theology. Of course, especially the further away someone is from faith, the more philosophical your arguments need to be, to get them there. So that's what I could say. And then all of that also, informs the way that I think about the philanthropy stuff that I do, and trying to build businesses and the missions, and that's a whole other thing. And it's the authentic empowerment of individual human beings in a way that is responsible, sustainable, and possible. That flows from philosophical reflections that were done by Taparelli and people following him in his line of thought.
Okay, thanks. For people who are outside of the academy and outside of the Catholic Academy specifically, where do you see the boundary being and the relationship being between philosophy and theology? And what kind of pressure do you think this critic was putting on you when he says you're not writing a philosophy doctorate, you're writing a theology doctorate, so please do some theology, without trying to pin you down or say anything that might get you in trouble? How would you explain that to people who are wondering now how the two are different?
Sure. I mean, I would say, you're doing philosophy if you're taking something that you can look at. and find out for yourself without the assistance of grace. And if it's data information that only comes from revelation and follows from revelation, then now you're doing something like theology. And if it's truly based on that revelation as fundamental primal authority, then it's theology properly speaking. If you give your consent to that authority as the formal structure of what you're doing, in line with that formal structure, that's theology. So in layman's terms, if you can look at it and figure it out for yourself, you're doing philosophy. But if you get the inside scoop from on high, then you're doing theology. That's kind of the basic idea. And so with my own work, I'm doing this reflection on justice and on wages and how to think about responsibility, this sort of thing. There's a lot of tension in the encyclical that I'm studying, Quadragesimo Anno, about workers' rights and duties of employers and this kind of stuff. That's all philosophical reflection. The theological part is going to be, I'm going to kind of, get into a critique of Rawls, I think, based on protology, Catholic protology, Trinitarian dogma, looking at the order of knowing and loving as flowing from the processions of the Son and the Holy Spirit, right? And this this does illumine the order of the universe. It's because creation is through the Word. And so we live in this dynamic of knowing first and then loving, even though those are, one in God, so to speak, but the processions are distinct. So that's theological. But looking at how to think about wages, this is a much more philosophical reflection.
Got it. Thanks. Some of our listeners might be supposing that the listening to you that the difference is if it's confusing, it's philosophy, and if it's extremely confusing, it's theology.
Yeah, not always wrong.
Let me ask you about one more project of yours, something that I've been following you talking about on Twitter, or what used to be Twitter, is an upcoming book project and perhaps a website about Catholic sexual ethics, about contraception and the like. Is there anything you can share with us about that, about your ambitions for that project and the timeline for its realization?
Sure. So a couple of years ago, I started this conference at the Angelicum. The first iteration was supposed to be in March of 2020. It didn't work out. It didn't work out. So we postponed, but it was supposed to be a students' theological conference, giving students, mostly STL and STD, doctoral students, a chance to share some research that they're doing or that they want to sort of, test out among their peers and get some feedback and have kind of a safe first experience of presenting something at a conference. And so eventually this took off, and now it's actually a degree requirement either to present at that conference or to publish in a journal or a book. So it was a big feather in my cap. But at one of those conferences, I presented a paper on what would St. Thomas Aquinas think about natural family planning. And I dug into this, and I found that, there's all of these puzzles going on in Sixth Commandment ethics, sexual ethics, that are actually quite unresolved in Catholic moral theology. If you get under like the most basic things, there are a lot of things that are not very clear. And the book goes into some of this that's unexplored with respect to periodic continence in view of the regulation or spacing of births. There's never been a moral scientific study of that topic in a book length format. To my knowledge, if it exists, then I would love to know it. But I've also done the archival research, for example, in the Apostolic Penitentiary, got my hands on that stuff, things that people just don't know even exist. So I'm looking forward to presenting that and giving a really rigorous exposition of some dimensions of that discussion, which really rarely get touched, including, for example, Innocent XI's bull Sanctissimus Dominus, which has something to say about the topic. So anyway, it's coming up soon. July 19th is the release date, which is the day before the U.S. Bishops' Conference has the NFP Awareness Week. So that's why I chose that date. So
Okay, great. Yeah, looking forward to that. That's I as a Catholic layman, married Catholic layman with four kids, we always are aware of the coming of NFP Awareness Week. It has a certain kind of place in the American church, doesn't it?
It does.
Let me ask you the question of the show, which is what kind of advice would you give to a college student who's in the position maybe that you were, say, 12 years ago, thinking about the study of philosophy, whether to pursue it further, whether to add it as a second major or as a minor? Is it the kind of thing that somebody from your perspective could offer advice to somebody who's maybe 18 or 20? What would you say?
So first thing is that it's worth doing, but you have to be a little bit realistic about employment prospects in the practice of philosophy per se. The job market for higher education, in philosophy is really rough, and I'm sure, Professor, you can explain at length how difficult it is to get into the world of teaching at the university level with a tenured position rather than just an adjunct, part-time one course a semester kind of thing. So you got to be realistic about your future. It's very, very unlikely you're going to be able to break into academia, properly speaking. So that's the first thing. So you just got to be aware that this is something you can do, but it's probably not in and of itself going to be a career. The second thing is, if you want to get serious about it, really spend time mastering basics about the history of the major thinkers and just really, really fundamental concepts. Hit the logic books really hard. Learn the categories. Just memorize definitions. Find really good introductory texts. Ask for help if you don't know what texts are good introductory books, and just really spend time with them. Don't try to get out over your skis. Don't try to just sound really intelligent. You will to people who don't know what they're talking about, and then you'll get out into the deeper water and you'll be in trouble. So just have a little humility, take your time, build a really good base, learn how to play scales, and then soon you'll be on your way.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. That sounds like very good advice. Let me share a few links if people would like to learn more, follow more about what you're doing. I know on Twitter you are, or x.com, you are Eamonn Clark,
Yep.
and you have a blog at christianrenaissancemovement.com and an online shop at profidestore.myshopify.com. I'll put all those links in the description to this episode. My guest today on Life After Philosophy has been Eamonn Clark, an American living in Rome and a 2014 graduate of Mount St. Mary's University. Thanks so much for being with us today, Eamonn.
Thank you, Professor. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Life After Philosophy. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate it 5 stars and share this episode with a friend. I appreciate your support.